Hello and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about mental health and specifically about self-esteem. I know a lot of people, including myself, struggle with low to moderate to sometimes very low self-esteem. There are times where we can be super high, and there are also the times where we can be really low. And I think it's important to take some time and to really learn about what's going on, both at a psychological and physiological level, and what we can do to actually improve it and to live a better life, to be happier, to be more mindful, to be more compassionate with others and with ourselves. We're going to be answering a couple of questions today. We're going to be looking at what self-esteem actually is. We're going to look at where it potentially came from. We're going to look at overall ways of how to improve your self-esteem, and we're also going to touch on self-validation and its role in how we feel about ourselves, which is essentially what self-esteem is. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, stick around. If you do like this video, I do ask that if you could like, comment, share, or subscribe. That would really help me on my way to becoming the YouTuber that I want to be. To begin today, I am going to be defining self-esteem for you. Self-esteem is defined as an individual's subjective evaluation of their worth and the feeling they have about that evaluation. So not only is it the evaluation itself, but it's how we perceive that evaluation. Essentially what that's saying is some people could evaluate themselves as being not a great person, but if that doesn't bother them, they're not going to have low self-esteem. What I also thought was very important to bring up is something called the Sociometer Hypothesis. And essentially what it mentions is a subjective index or marker of the extent to which a person is included or looked on favorably by others. All right, so let's unpack this a little bit further. The things that make us feel good about ourselves, things like feeling attractive, feeling competent, fill in the blank, are exactly those things that make others accept us. If you are not accepted, you're probably not going to have very high self-esteem. And that goes back to a whole bunch of evolutionary principles as well, and the power of being accepted, being part of the group actually meant that you were going to survive. Our self-esteem is somewhat attributable to how we are seen in the world and what others think of us. So as much as we would love to say that we do not compare ourselves to others and that the opinions of others do not matter, unfortunately the science says that it really does, and it really affects our internal evaluation of ourselves. I also wanted to go into the negative effects of low self-esteem. Having low self-esteem isn't only bad for your mental health. It actually extends a lot further than that, and it ripples away from you. The way we think about ourselves affects others, and that's what the research says. If not for yourself, better your self-esteem for others, which is kind of a funny idea to really think about. But I think a lot of people place more importance on others and often forget about themselves. And so if that has to be your motivation to better your own mental health and to take care of yourself, then let it be. That is perfectly okay. All right, so some of the negative side effects are that it does create anxiety, stress, loneliness, and an increased likelihood of depression. All awful things that we do not want and we would not wish upon others. It also causes problems in friendships and romantic relationships. Having low self-esteem sometimes leads to jealousy issues, which is not good for any relationship. It sometimes results in trust issues, which again is not going to favor your relationship. We also see some negative effects impairing job performance or even academic performance. And this actually goes into something called the self-fulfilling prophecy, which essentially states that we will perform at a level that we think we will. If you have a prophecy that you are bad at math, it's actually more likely that you will do more poorly than others on that math test. However, if you have a prophecy that you're great at English, for example, you actually put yourself in situations in which you will improve on your English mark, you will get a good grade on your essay, you will be more confident, and the teacher will see that and actually read your actions and your paper and what else as better than it might be. Having low self-esteem also leads to increased vulnerability of drug and alcohol use. Just the fact that you have low self-esteem leads leads you to want to avoid the shame that you might feel about yourself. And an effective but maladaptive way to deal with that is through drug and alcohol abuse. This makes a lot of sense when you really think about it. And the hardest part about all of these negative effects is each one will actually reduce your self-esteem even further. And so every time we look at a situation and we appraise it as being our fault, then that self-esteem is just going to drop. And it's a cycle, and it's a vicious one. And just a little bit on a happier note, or at least a more optimistic note, I do want to talk a little bit very shortly about the progression of self-esteem, because there's been some really interesting research about how self-esteem progresses through our development. And essentially, when we are teeny children, we have the best self-esteem we are ever gonna have. Just think of a little 5-year-old who colors in a drawing and honestly thinks he's Picasso. Kids are on top of the world. They think they're the queens and kings. And you know what? Let them. It's very wholesome to see. Go on Twitter, go on Instagram, go on your favorite social media platform, watch some toddler videos. But then, unfortunately, what ends up happening is when we reach our adolescence, in particular females, have a very large drop in our self-esteem. And so this is very normal for this to happen. And I think a lot of it comes from social pressure. And this is when we're experiencing peer pressure for the first time. We're experiencing how mean other kids can be. And we really want to fit in any aspect where we feel different, which I'll give you a pro tip here. Everybody feels different. As soon as you feel different, you feel worse about yourself. And that, although sad, is a very normal process. The good part is when you reach your adulthood later in life, your self-esteem actually levels out a little bit. So we're really high in kids. We drop down as an adolescent, and then we, rise pretty heavily when we're an adult again. We never reach that prime self-esteem of a 4-year-old, for example. But we do get a lot happier with ourselves as we age and we accept who we are. So you have that to look forward to if you are still an adolescent. Now I think we can really talk about what self-esteem is. This information is actually from CMHC at the University of Texas at Austin. I read an article that mentioned 3 different types of low self-esteem. The first one is called the imposter. I think this is probably the most common one. This is the one I see myself in if I did have to categorize myself. And it basically says that the person appears happy and successful, but is truly constantly battling with the fear of failure. In order to maintain the mask of being happy and successful, they actually have to strive for constant opportunities to succeed. If they're not succeeding, then they can no longer wear the mask, and they do appear very sad and more like a traditional low self-esteem person. I probably fit into this specifically when you look at how this manifests. The article does mention that these people tend to be perfectionists, tend to procrastinate, they love competition, and they are more prone to burnout. The second one is actually called the rebel. It's somebody who says that opinions of others do not faze them. They don't care what others think of them, but they live in constant anger. It's all fueled by not feeling good enough. What it often leads to is blaming others, breaking rules, opposing authority. So really just think of, that typical movie teenager who does not follow any of the rules and is always in detention. The third and final type of low self-esteem that you can have is called the victim. This is more of what you would imagine someone with low self-esteem is like. So somebody who acts helpless, always awaiting somebody to help them out. So I almost want to think of Disney princesses when I hear this definition. Basically just someone who doesn't take responsibility and is waiting for someone else to solve their problems because they both feel and tell the world that they are incapable. This is going to lead to things like unassertiveness, over-dependence, excess reliance to others, but also just underachievement because they're not really doing much. They're waiting. So now we're going to get into where it comes from. Very often, our self-esteem is created when we are a child. So it is who we have as our authority figures, how they treat us, but also how other children treat us, how we fit in. The one thing I do want to mention that I think is very interesting and not often thought about is how you were praised as a child can actually really affect your self-esteem. And so there are 2 ways a parent can congratulate a child on an achievement. They can either congratulate the act itself and the work put into it, or they can congratulate the person. They're very different even if they don't seem to be. Saying something like, "Congratulations, you worked so hard," is actually much more valuable to a child than saying something like, "Congratulations, you did amazing." Basically what we're looking at is something called incremental orientation versus entity orientation. The child is either learning that their success was based on the work and effort they put into the task, or they're learning that they succeeded because of who they are. That seems fine until you consider what happens when they fail. And so children with more of an incremental orientation, which is where they strive to put in effort and they believe that success comes from hard work, when they fail, think, oh, I didn't try hard enough. And that is very easy to fix because next time you can just try a little harder. The people with entity orientation, on the other hand, which is the ones who focus on their own abilities as being the reason why they succeeded, when they fail, they believe the failure is internal. They believe the failure is global, meaning it'll extend to other situations as well. They believe they failed because they are not good enough. When you're parenting, I highly recommend that rather than saying things like, oh, you're so special, of course you were going to ace that test, you're the reason you're succeeding, really focus on the work because it'll really help them in the long run. And so now we're going to be talking about how you can improve your self-esteem. Think of this as a turnaround point. Maybe you've been watching this video and now you've realized, okay, I need to do something about this. This is what you can do. All of this information actually comes from a TED Talk speaker named Guy Winch, who has a lot of information and a lot of expertise on this topic. So Guy Winch actually mentions 5 things that you can do to improve your self-esteem. Some of them are easier than others, and some of them really take practice. This is a process. It will not happen in a day. Please don't expect it to. Expect to change your life through hard work, time, and effort. The first one that he does mention is to use positive affirmations. This is also super interesting because there's actually a lot of research that has been done to suggest that people with low self-esteem, after they're complimented, they actually feel worse about themselves. I actually read about a study when I was in university about children who fall all over the spectrum on self-esteem. Some have high self-esteem, some have low self-esteem. They got them to paint 2 pictures, and between painting these 2 pictures, they had their art reviewed by art critic, who was actually just a Confederate. What they found is children with high self-esteem, if they received a compliment after their first painting, they actually did better on their second one. And they tried harder. They really put a lot more effort in because they were excited to get another compliment. And so children with low self-esteem, after receiving a compliment after their first painting, actually didn't put in as much effort and felt worse while doing the second painting. And this is essentially because when we have low self-esteem and we receive a compliment, the expectations seem to be risen and we do not want to fail. And so if you set yourself up for failure by not trying as hard, then it's not your fault. And that's a way that we can protect ourselves. Positive affirmations are essentially telling ourselves a claim that we want to believe is true. Let's say I really wanted to get better at painting, to keep our example earlier. I would be retelling myself the positive affirmation that I am a good painter. The problem is, if you do have low self-esteem and you try to do this and your claim is completely unbelievable to yourself, it will actually affect you negatively. You need to make sure your positive affirmations are at least somewhat ingrained in truth, something you can believe and stand behind. The second thing he mentions is to identify your competencies and develop them. This is really interesting because it's essentially saying find what you're good at and do it, which makes a lot of sense because obviously that's going to make you feel better about yourself if you're constantly doing something you're already good at. And so this is something like if you think you're good at cooking, go cook a meal for your friends. They will compliment you and that will help you. The third thing he says to do is to stop denying compliments. Learn to accept them. Even if it's completely uncomfortable for you, just say thank you. It's kind of fake it till you make it, but eventually you will learn to accept compliments and you will get good at it. The fourth thing, which I think is extremely important that Guy mentions, is to reduce your self-criticism and introduce it with self-compassion. There's a voice in our head. Most people have it. I do. And my voice is pretty negative. I am a pretty self-critical person. Whenever you hear those thoughts, what you should be doing is first notice them, recognize them, and reframe them, which is the most important part. Take your negative thought and reframe it in a self-compassionate light. So let's say I am editing this video in the future and I think, oh my gosh, I didn't get any good footage. I am awful. What I need to do is take that thought and be self-compassionate towards myself. Maybe I reframe it to say, you did a lot of filming and not all of it worked out, but that's okay. And that's it. I like to think that the first thought that comes to your mind is actually what society has conditioned you to think. The second thought is really representative of who you are. And so if you replace that self-critical thought with a self-compassionate thought more and more, eventually those self-critical thoughts will go away. And that's the ideal situation. So I really think if you take nothing else from this video, please practice that. Watch your thoughts as they come, accept them, and reframe the negative ones. The final thing that Guy mentions to do is to really affirm your good qualities. So an example example that he gives that you are able to do very concretely is if you're ever feeling negative about yourself, you're feeling like you're really in a place of low self-esteem, take out a pen and paper, take out a notepad or whatever you have, and write out the things you're good at. Write out all the reasons you are a good person. And you can do this in the same sense as before, is when you have that negative thought, write out all the reasons why it's not true. Try and do that. It's going to be a hard practice, but it is a practice. It's something you have to do over and over again, and it will get easier, and it will be very powerful if you do end up doing it. Those are all the things you can be doing to improve your self-esteem, and I 100% recommend that you try at least one, but for optimal results, obviously try them all. See which ones work for you and stick with it. It's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen if you give it enough time. The final thing I really do want to talk about is self-validation. And this is because I have figured out that this is an area that I really want to improve on. I find that I'm always looking for external validation. I'm always looking for my boss to tell me I'm doing a good job, for my teachers to tell me they really liked the work that I submitted. I should be able to validate my own work and be that voice, so I don't need others. And all of this obviously connects back to self-esteem, because if I am able to validate myself and I don't need that external validation anymore, then I'm actually not relying on others to come up with my own evaluation. I'm doing it myself, and I can be as nice to myself as I want to be. So I did also want to explore some ways to improve your self-validation. So the information I'm getting today is from an article written by Lori Deschain on tinybuddha.com. It's an article talking about 5 ways to validate yourself. The first one I really like, it basically mentions to make you part of your gratitude journal. So if you don't know what a gratitude journal is, it's basically a journal that you write in every day and you write what you're grateful for. And this article is suggesting if you make a small section where you write about why you are grateful for who you are, that will actually really increase your ability to validate yourself. Another thing you can do is every time you're about to seek external validation, figure out what you want them to say and say it to yourself. It's a simple yet somewhat uncomfortable exercise, but I do recommend that you try it. If you try and say it to yourself and you do it enough times, maybe it'll work. Another thing you can do is try to be the parent to your child's self. So essentially, what would your parent say in this situation? This one is really getting into that self-compassionate part again. We need to be nice to ourselves, and I think a lot of us really struggle with that. I know I do. Be patient, be your own support system, and watch yourself grow. The final thing that you can do is essentially to get in the habit of asking yourself, what do I need right now? And getting yourself what you need. And so that can be anything, but it again goes into parenting. Every parent looks to their child and figures out what they need. You know how many times I was asked if I had to pee before a road trip? Most times I did. And I needed my mom to be able to remind me. Just be attentive to yourself, to your needs, and try and fulfill them as much as you can. So essentially that wraps up my video on self-esteem. I hope you learned a little bit, but my real hope is that you take these exercises into your own practice. And even if you do share this video with others who you think might benefit from it, that would be awesome as well, because everybody can benefit from being more self-compassionate and also increasing our self-esteem and decreasing our risks of all of those negative side effects. So I actually myself will be practicing these techniques. I can give you an update on the comments in a couple of weeks to see if anything happens for me. Hopefully it does. I really hope that I am able to lift my shoulders up a little bit and be comfortable in my own skin. I am going to be doing some positive affirmations. I will be telling myself that I am good enough. That will be my simple beginning positive affirmation, because I find that a lot of my problems actually stem from an anxiety of not feeling good enough. And if that is also you, I encourage you, go ahead and use my positive affirmation, or, change it a little bit, make it your own. Make it personal, try it out, say it as much as you can, say it loud, say it proud, be open to change, be open to improvement, and be open to a newer, better, more methodical version of yourself.